We are beginning Topic 1, Lesson 4, New Ways of Life. Please open your digital notebook in your Google Classroom. You will notice this digital notebook is the longest digital notebook we've had so far. Page 1 has your 3 vocab words. Page 2, there are 2 questions. Page 3, there are 2 questions. Page 4, there are 2 questions. Page 5, you only have 1 question. And then all the rest of the pages, page 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11, each have 2 questions. This digital notebook is worth 25 points. Remember, those yellow with red numbers are quiz questions. Let's go ahead and begin.
People of the Paleolithic era, or Old Stone Age, lived as hunter-gatherers. They could not have imagined many of the things that we now take for granted. People often had to follow herds of animals, so they were unable to settle for long in one place. People could own few possessions, only what they could easily carry. Food supplies were uncertain. Life for many was short and dangerous. In time, most hunter-gatherers stopped wandering in search of food and settled in one place. Life was still different, and survival was still the main concern. But with people staying in one place, the world began to take on many features we recognize today.
All right, let's watch this video, The Birth of Farming.
People use the term revolution to describe huge changes in the way people live, say like a change in government. The agricultural revolution brought an almost total change in the way people lived. For thousands of years, people had moved around the land with the seasons, taking just what they and their pack animals could carry. Maybe they spent the summer in one place, the winter in another, but nowhere was home. Once people settled down to become farmers, though, they had a permanent place to live. They built houses of different materials, depending on where they were: stone, sun-dried bricks, wood, or mud and straw, all depending on the place. And they could start to own things like furniture and clay pots and iron tools, all sorts of things they would otherwise have had to leave behind when they moved on. Yet farming was not an easy life. Herding, planting, and caring for a farm took an enormous amount of time and hard work. And of course, there were no machines to help. And results weren't always certain, since crops depend so much on the weather. Some days, all a farmer could do was hope for rain. Other days, he prayed that the rain would stop. Disease could attack both crops and farm animals, and sometimes bands of wandering nomads attacked farms to steal food. But farming also changed culture and society in important ways. Can you imagine why that happened? The biggest reason was an increased food supply. Some families were able to grow a surplus, more food than they needed. That meant that life was now more stable than being constantly on the move looking for food. Farmers could trade their surplus food for something else they needed, like a new cow or goat or some firewood. Farming even gave people new ways of dressing. Hunters on the move usually wore heavy, hot animal skins. Now, people learned to spin cotton and linen from plant fibers. Wool fibers came from sheep or goats or other farm animals. Some people became skilled weavers, making fine cloth. Over time, the agricultural revolution brought changes to all parts of society. Surplus food could help support a village and let the local population grow. It also meant that not everyone had to work at supplying food. That allowed a few people to learn trades and crafts. One person might become skilled at working with metal and making iron tools, while another made better clay bowls and pots. After a while, people could begin to trade both crafts and food with nearby villages. Trade became an important link between villages and brought different groups of people closer together. Villages grew into towns. As more people began to live in the same place, they had to form councils and governments to keep order. They learned to work together to dig canals or build roads for the whole settlement. Sometimes they had to band together to defend against invaders. Naturally, some people became leaders and then competed for power and leadership. Gradually, some small farming centers were on the way to becoming the earliest cities. Why was trade an important step in changing the lives of people in farming villages?
All right, let's go ahead and continue on with our digital notebook. On the first page, you see your 3 vocabulary words. Surplus means extra. Specialization is the act of concentrating on a limited number of goods or activities. Economy, the system by which a country's people make a living. Please take 3 minutes and define these 3 vocab words. As the heading says, use the PowerPoint, that purple PowerPoint, and just copy and paste the definitions from there. Do that now, please. All right, moving on. We are moving on to page 2 of your digital notebook. Where were the first centers of agriculture?
Where did farming begin, and how did it spread? No one knows for sure where people first began to plant seeds for food. Still, archaeologists have found evidence to suggest where farming began and how it spread. They have also learned something about the way people lived in early farming communities. Where were the first centers of agriculture? Most historians believe that about 10,000 years ago, southwestern Asia became the first center of agriculture. There, scientists have unearthed seeds from domesticated wheat plants that were buried long ago. The seeds are similar to wild varieties of wheat that still grow in the area. Farming may then have spread from southwestern Asia westward into Africa. It may have also spread northward into Europe and eastward into the Indus River Valley of South Asia. Other centers of agriculture appeared independently in different areas of the world. In southwestern Asia, for example, farming began when people started to plant wheat and barley. In the southern part of present-day China, farming began with the domestication of rice. Farther to the north, a grain called millet was the first crop to be domesticated. In Central and South America, people learned to grow potatoes, beans, and squash. In Africa, farming began with crops such as sorghum and yams.
Number 1, where was the first center of agriculture? You'll find that answer in this circled yellow text. Number 2, what evidence do historians use to support their belief in the origins of agriculture? In other words, what did they find that proves that is there evidence that this place is actually the center of agriculture? You will find that answer in this green highlighted text.
What were the costs and benefits of farming? In every place that agriculture developed, the transition from hunting and gathering to farming took place gradually over a long period of time. Each way of life had costs as well as benefits. Some of the costs of shifting to agriculture were clear. First, planting crops and herding, or bringing together animals, took a great deal of time and energy. Second, farming was uncertain. If a year's crop failed due to bad weather or disease, a family might starve. Third, farming could be dangerous. Evidence suggests that bands of nomads sometimes attacked farmers and stole their food. Agriculture also offered many benefits. Farming produced more food and required less land than hunting and gathering. An early farm family might need only 6 to 7 acres of land to raise enough wheat or maize to feed themselves for a year. In contrast, a hunter-gatherer family needed about 20,000 acres on which to find enough food for a year.
Number 3, what are the main costs and benefits of farming? Please give me 2 costs and 2 benefits. In this green highlighted text, you will find those.
As a result of agriculture, more people were able to build permanent homes in farming villages. Farming also provided new sources of material for clothing. Later in this section, you'll read more about the new types of shelter and clothing that were invented during the Neolithic era. Some groups tried farming for a time and then returned to hunting and gathering. But in the end, most people chose to remain farmers.
Number 4, what made the first villages possible? In this yellow or circled text, you'll find that answer. All right, let's move on to page 4 of our digital notebook. Click Next. And as soon as the highlights and annotations are loaded, you can go ahead and remove that wall.
How did farming change human culture? The first effect of farming was on people's food supply. But over time, the Neolithic agricultural revolution transformed every part of human culture. What new kinds of shelter did people build? Farmers found ways to build permanent shelters. People used a mixture of mud and straw to form walls. The sun baked and hardened the mixture. People made roofs by placing poles and branches across the tops of walls and covering them with mud.
Let's pause there. Number 1, how did farming change people's shelters? You'll find that answer in this pink highlighted text. Number 2, how were houses in Chelyuhuk built? You'll find that answer in this blue highlighted text. Moving on to page 5.
One of the oldest known farming settlements in the world is a village called Çatalhöyük. It stood in present-day Turkey more than 8,000 years ago. At its height, up to 6,000 people may have lived in Çatalhöyük. The environment provided sources of water and building materials. British archaeologists described the two-story homes that made up the settlement. The houses of Çatalhöyük were so tightly packed together that there were few or no streets. Access to interior spaces was across roofs, which had been made of wood and reeds plastered with mud, and downstairs. People buried their dead beneath the floors. Above all, the interiors were rich with artwork, mural paintings, reliefs, and sculptures, including images of women that some interpreted as evidence for a cult of a mother goddess. Ian Hodder, This Old House. Each home had its own kitchen and food storage area. The people grew grains and raised flocks of sheep and goats. How did farming change clothing? Agriculture also changed the way that people dressed. For hunter-gatherers, the most important materials for clothing were animal hides and furs. Farming provided new materials that were lighter and easier to work with. From Egypt and India to the Americas, farmers domesticated the cotton plant. They learned to weave cloth from the plant fibers. Another plant, flax, became a source of linen. Domesticated animals such as sheep and yaks also provided clothing materials. People used wool and other animal hair to form yarn or thread. In China, people later learned to breed silkworms.
Number 3, what was the biggest change that farming caused in the way of Neolithic people dressed? In the way that, I should probably add that, in the way that Neolithic people dressed. You'll find that answer, and there's a couple here, in this green highlighted text. All right, let's move on to page 6. This looks like an important page.
What were the effects of food surpluses? As crops and herds improved, the amount of food that farmers could produce each year increased. Some farmers were able to raise a surplus, or more than they needed to feed themselves. Surplus food could support a growing population. The size of farming villages thus increased. When there was a surplus of food, not everyone in a village needed to farm. Some people could specialize. Specialization occurred when people spend most of their time working at a single job or craft. They could then trade the goods they made for the surplus food grown by farmers. Skilled tool makers turned stone into polished axes and knives. Potters shaped clay into bowls. Weavers wove sheep's wool into cloth. A few people also became skilled at metalworking. Early metal workers heated ore to extract or remove such metals as copper and tin.
Number 4, when there is a surplus of food, what does that mean? So if we have a surplus of food, then what? You'll find that answer in this first circled yellow paragraph. Number 5, specialization includes people who are good at how many skills? You'll find that answer in the second circled yellow paragraph. All right, let's move on to page 7 in your digital notebook.
How did farming change social organization? Early farming communities remained small. Like hunting, farming required close cooperation among members of the community. Heads of families consulted to make important decisions. They might discuss when to plant and harvest crops, what to do with food surpluses, or how to protect the community from outside dangers. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of several Neolithic villages, such as Skara Brae in Scotland. In these villages, all homes were more or less the same size. Some historians believe this means that great differences in social standing did not yet exist.
Number 6 on page 7, how did government take shape in Neolithic villages? You'll find that answer in this green highlighted paragraph. Number 7, what do some scientists infer about the social structure of Neolithic villages from the evidence that all homes were the same size? You will find that answer in this pink highlighted paragraph. Let's move on to page 8 of your digital notebook.
Still having a permanent place to live meant that people could own more possessions. Early farmers filled their homes with furniture, tools, clay pots, and other goods. These items would have been too heavy to move from one campsite to another. Over time, some families accumulated more food and possessions than others. Food surplus sometimes led to conflict, however, as some groups wanted to expand their supplies at the expense of others. Some people hired guards to protect their wealth. As surpluses increased and people began to specialize, greater social differences emerged. As evidence of this inequality, scientists have unearthed graves with jewelry and other fine materials, while other graves have none of these things.
Number 8, what types of useful objects did early farmers fill their homes with? You'll find that answer in this blue highlighted paragraph. Give me at least 2 examples. Number 9, how did permanent settlements lead to social differences in the Neolithic era? In this green highlighted text, you will find that answer. All right, let's move on to page 9 of your digital notebook. If you, we're actually going to skip this interactive gallery. It's Utsi. We will watch a documentary about Utsi. So on page 9 of your digital notebook is where we will begin.
How did the first cities begin? The world's first cities began as farming villages in the Middle East. As the villages grew, they began to trade with one another. Trade, like farming, became an important source of wealth. The city of Uruk. Many historians consider Uruk to be the world's first city. It is thought to have been founded 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Uruk was different from Çatalhöyük and older farming villages. One difference was Uruk's size. Çatalhöyük covered about 32 acres and was home to no more than 6,000 people. When Uruk was at its height, more than 40,000 people lived there. Uruk covered an area of nearly 1,000 acres and had houses, gardens, and large public buildings such as temples. Another difference was Uruk's form of government. Villages such as Çatalhöyük had little need for complex government. People acted and made decisions according to ancient village customs. A village council settled most disputes. A city such as Uruk was too large to manage that way. Uruk had a strong, well-organized government. The city's first rulers were probably temple priests. Later, powerful military leaders ruled Uruk as kings. These rulers had far more power than a village council did.
Number 1, according to historians, why is Uruk important? You'll find that answer in this green highlighted 2 sentences. Number 2, how was Uruk different from Çatalhöyük? There are quite a few differences, but give me 2. You'll find those differences in this pink highlighted area. Let's move on to page 10 in your digital notebook.
How did cities become centers of wealth? A city such as Uruk also had a more complex economy than did early farming villages. An economy is the system that a community uses to produce and distribute goods and services.
All right, let's pause there. What happens in a community's economy? You'll find that answer in the circled yellow text.
In the earliest human communities, each group produced these goods and services that were necessary for its survival. The group produced these goods and services by hunting and gathering. The goods and services were then shared by the members of the community. Çatalhöyük's economy was based mainly on farming. By contrast, Uruk's more complex economy was based on both farming and trade. Workshops that produced all kinds of goods lined the city's streets. Traders from Uruk traveled widely. Archaeologists have found pottery and other trade goods from Uruk in many places in the Middle East.
Number 2, how are the economies of Uruk and Çatalhöyük similar and different? Give me one similarity and give me one difference. You'll find those in this pink highlighted paragraph. Let's move on to the last page of our digital notebook, page 11.
The wealth of Uruk and other early cities attracted many newcomers. People began to move from the countryside into the cities. Many early cities built walls to protect themselves from raiders. Uruk, for example, was surrounded by a thick wall that stretched for 6 miles around the city. This wall was a sign that Uruk was a wealthy city worth protecting.
Number 3, why did new people move to Uruk? You'll find that answer in the blue highlighted text. 2 sentences. And number 4, how did the city of Uruk protect itself from raiders? So that a raider is someone who's going to come in and steal. So you'll find that answer in this green highlighted, I think it's 3-ish sentences.